Hi folks. By now most of us are familiar with the signal chat shenanigans, in which a reporter was accidentally invited to a signal chat where potentially classified information was being discussed. You may also be aware I haven't posted a video in a while. Well, that's because I'm working on a pretty big documentary about solving one of the most important UFO mysteries in history. But I found myself thinking, Blue, you have some training and experience as an OPSEC and COIC. When it comes to classified information leakage, why not address some questions people are asking on the internet? By the way, if after watching this entire video you have additional questions, please ask them in the comments and I will try to answer them. If you wouldn't mind liking this video so that other people can see this information, that would be really great. I'd really appreciate it. With that said, in 2009, Executive Order 13526 was published, which established or clarified or modified many rules regarding the classification and declassification of information. For information to be classified, it must be under the control of the U.S. government, meet the criteria for a confidential, secret, or top secret designation, must be related to one of several categories to include military plans, weapon systems, or operations, and must be potentially damaging to national security, which explicitly includes defense against transnational terrorism, if an authorized disclosure occurs. If the classification process was automatic, I believe a strong and simple argument could be made that the contents of the signal chat conversation contain classified information. But classification does not occur automatically, so I have some explaining to do. When information is identified as needing to be classified, it is sent to an OCA, or Original Classification Authority, who is responsible for classifying the information and for issuing Security Classification Guides, or SCGs, identifying what type of information should be considered a candidate for classification. In this case, that guide would have been issued by CENTCOM, or U.S. Central Command, which was identified in the signal chat as the command authority of the missile strikes. CENTCOM's SCG specifically states the date and time a mission or operation begins, timelines or schedules, concepts of operations, details of the movements of U.S. forces, and some of you may be surprised by this, information about target area weather should be classified as secret. Even just general information not revealing any details is expected to be classified as confidential. If this information had been classified in accordance with the CENTCOM's SCG and it had not been declassified by the time it was sent in the signal chat, this information would still be classified. And no, not marking it as classified does not mean it's not classified. It means you violated the Department of Defense policy. But if, for whatever reason, it hadn't been classified, then someone who was supposed to classify it may be in a lot of trouble. And even if they hadn't classified it, or if it had been classified but nobody in the chat had been made aware, that raises many additional questions, such as, why did nobody tell the National Security Advisor, the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, and the Director of the CIA that this information was classified? And why were none of these people aware it should have been classified? Were they not briefed or trained or taught how to handle this type of data? Well, that would be concerning. We can, of course, assume that perhaps it had been classified and everyone who was intended to be in the chat knew this, but it had also been declassified by the time the reporter became involved. This would be very strange, considering the earliest any of the information should have been declassified, per CENTCOM's own SCG, was after the completion of the mission. These messages were sent before the mission started, but the Vice President and the Secretary of Defense have the authority to declassify information, so surely they can just decide that it automatically gets declassified the moment they discuss it in the presence of someone without the proper clearance, right? No. According to the 2020 ruling in the New York Times versus Central Intelligence Agency, declassification cannot occur unless designated officials follow specified procedures. And if those procedures were followed, then nobody in that group chat should be concerned. After all, they said it wasn't classified, so either some poor service member somewhere is about to end up in Leavenworth, or there's a paper trail proving it was declassified. But even if the reporter hadn't been added to the group chat, the method of communication violates Department of Defense policies and procedures, probably. A 2023 memorandum for senior Pentagon leadership states unmanaged messaging apps, defined as mobile device applications that are not controlled and installed by an enterprise management system, including any app with a chat feature, regardless of the primary function, are not authorized to access, transmit, or process non-public DoD information, which, by the way, includes unclassified information. Signal is specifically mentioned as an unauthorized, unmanaged app, although an exception to policy request may be submitted by the appropriate component for use of an unmanaged messaging app that is critical to fulfilling mission operations. Considering the resources available to the people who were meant to be in the chat, I would be surprised to learn that Signal would be a necessary app requiring an exception to policy in that circumstance. But if Signal was necessary, then surely procedure was followed. The request exists as part of the paper trail for the investigators to review, and nobody involved should be worried. In fact, there should be a lot of paper trails leading to exactly who messed up here. And once that person is identified, there are a few consequences that could come into play. If someone responsible for properly classifying information and marking it as such failed to do so in accordance with CENTCOM and DoD policy, and that person was an active military service member or a retired military service member entitled to retirement pay, then they might be in violation of Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which criminalizes a failure to obey any lawful general order or regulation. This could apply to for example, CENTCOM service member or retired Colonel Mike Waltz. If, on the other hand, that person was an employee of the US government, then they could be subject to sanctions. This would apply to Mike Waltz and Pete Hegseth, as they were the ones transmitting information that probably should have been marked confidential or secret. But this only might apply if the information was actually classified and they were aware of that fact. If someone was aware the information was classified and they used an unauthorized communication application to transmit it, and that person was a retired service member entitled to pay, such as presumably again retired Colonel Mike Waltz, then they could be subject to Article 92. If the person was an employee of the US government, then they could be subject to sanctions. Again, this would be potentially Mike Waltz and Pete Hegseth. If someone was an employee of the US government, was aware the information was classified, and was aware the application was unauthorized, assuming that it was, and failed to report these facts as soon as reasonably possible, they could be subject to sanctions. This could apply to every single person, with the exception of the reporter, in that group chat. And if the information was classified and was made available to an unauthorized person, such as a reporter accidentally invited to a group chat, then whoever made it available to the unauthorized person might meet the elements of 18 U.S.C. 793, which has a maximum sentence of 10 years. This might apply to Mike Waltz, who's really racking up the maybes. So our list of people who could be potentially and legally punished for this includes everyone, except the reporter, actually. Which raises the question, did the reporter do the wrong thing? Well, a lot of people have a lot of opinions about this, but legally, I don't believe he did. The reporter publicized the fact that there was what I would consider a major security issue, and I don't plan to hold his apparent interest in keeping the government accountable against him. Once relevant government officials said he was lying, and once relevant government officials testified that there was no classified information, what exactly was stopping him? Not the law. You can't be charged with publishing classified information if the information isn't classified, which incidentally is what sets the reporter apart from Edward Snowden. I mention that because I've seen it a lot, that comparison, and it's not the same thing at all. Edward Snowden had lawful access to information that he knew was classified and made it available to people who he knew were not authorized to have it. Of all the people who might be compared to Snowden in this situation, I don't think the reporter is the closest match, although I wouldn't say anyone involved is really a close match to what Snowden did. We're coming dangerously close to me stating an opinion about something, but I don't really consider it reasonable in this context to attack someone for defending their own credibility. Freedom of press is part of the First Amendment, one of the things I signed up to defend when I took the oath to serve my country. One might even argue that proving the original claims after the completion of the discussed military operation is beneficial to national security, or at the very least less damaging than giving unauthorized personnel access to information related to an imminent military operation. And in fact, if the relevant personnel just said, oh, that is classified, oops, our bad, it probably wouldn't have gotten published. But that's an argument for another time and another place by other people. So until the next time, be good, stay safe.